The D.A.R.K. Chapter 1. The Island's Whisper. The heat of the Bermudian afternoon shimmered off the pastel-colored buildings of Hamilton, twisting the air into a lazy, humid embrace. On Front Street, the usual bustle of tourists spilling from cruise ships mingled with locals darting into banks and shops. The air hummed with the familiar symphony of scooter engines and distant ferry horns. It was, to all outward appearances, paradise, but beneath the surface, a subtle unease had begun to ripple through the island. It wasn't spoken of in loud voices, but in hushed tones in cafes, in anxious glances across crowded rooms. For the past 2 weeks, 3 men had vanished from Bermuda, without a trace. Not tourists who simply missed the flight, but established residents, men of prominence, whose disappearances defied logic. First, Marcus Thorne, a shrewd, cutthroat financier known for his predatory business practices and lavish lifestyle, vanished from his multi-million-dollar cliffside estate in Tuckerstown. The gate was wide open, his security cameras inexplicably offline for a crucial hour. His yacht, usually docked at the Royal Hamilton Amateur Dinghy Club, was found adrift off the North Shore, its engine running, a half-empty glass of amber rum on the deck. No sign of Thorne. The Bermuda Police Service, accustomed to petty theft and minor traffic infractions, was baffled. Then, 5 days later, Alistair Finch, a highly respected but notoriously private historian and collector of Bermudiana, disappeared from his isolated, meticulously restored colonial home in St. George's. He had been in the midst of a heated public debate about the controversial demolition of a historic building for a new luxury development. His rare, irreplaceable collection of antique maps and maritime artifacts was untouched. The only anomaly, a single, exquisitely carved wooden long-tailed bird, crafted from ancient Bermudian cedar, left precisely in the center of his otherwise undisturbed desk. Finch, a man who lived his life by ritual and schedule, had simply evaporated. Now a third man, a visiting British dignitary involved in several high-profile offshore banking reforms, had gone missing from his secured hotel suite in Southampton. His disappearance was being handled with extreme discretion, but the whispers had intensified into a low, anxious hum. Detective Sergeant Sinclair Howard, a Bermudian native with the island's sun-kissed complexion and a weary resolve in his dark eyes, stood on the balcony of his Hamilton apartment, gazing out at the impossibly blue expanse of the Great Sound. He'd spent his entire career navigating the quiet intricacies of island crime, where major cases were rare and everything felt manageable. These disappearances felt different. They felt professional, calculated, and oddly personal. His phone buzzed. It was Detective Constable Bree Patterson, his sharp, intuitive partner. She was a newer transplant to the island from Canada, her hazel eyes constantly absorbing the nuances of Bermudian life. Sinclair. Her voice was crisp, cutting through the humid air. Another one, the dignitary. Confirmed missing. No forced entry. No ransom note. Nothing. 3 in 2 weeks, Bree, Sinclair said, running a hand through his closely cropped hair. 3 prominent men. No commonalities beyond their standing in society. No trace. No leads. It's like they just dissolved. That's what's worrying me, Sinclair. Dissolved. But there are always ripples. And I think I found a small one. Bree paused, then continued, her voice thoughtful. The uniformed officer who first responded to Thorne's yacht found something odd. Not on the yacht, but tucked into the stern mooring rope when they pulled it in. A single, perfectly preserved mollusk shell. Not a common Bermudian conch. Something else. Something rare. He thought it was just litter, but he bagged it anyway. Now here's the kicker. I cross-referenced it. It's a Coronia tritonis shell. Triton's trumpet. Extremely rare in these waters. Usually found in deep Pacific or Indian Ocean reefs. It's a collector's item. Sinclair frowned. A shell? What would a shell have to do with Thorne? That's what I don't know, Bree admitted. But Finch had that carved bird, and now a rare shell. It feels intentional, like a calling card, but for what? Commissioner Vance, a portly man whose perpetually flushed face mirrored the island's escalating anxiety, had called an emergency meeting. The pressure from Whitehall and Washington, D.C. was immense. Bermuda's reputation, its very image as a tranquil, safe haven, was at stake. We have a phantom on our hands, people, Vance boomed, his voice echoing in the small briefing room. 3 disappearances, no leads, no demands. The governor himself is breathing down my neck. The international community is watching. This is an unprecedented crisis for our island. We need to find something, anything. Before panic sets in, Sinclair and Bree exchanged a look. Panic was already a quiet whisper, but it was growing louder with each passing day. The phantom had left a shell and a bird. But what did they mean? And what would he leave next? The humid air seemed to grow heavier, pressing down on the island as the unknown stalked its shores. The D.A.R.K had arrived. Chapter 2, The Silent Architect. Damien Aaron Red King watched the unfolding police activity from the secluded tranquility of his family's ancestral property, nestled discreetly amidst a tangle of sea grape and Bermuda cedars, overlooking the azure expanse of the South Shore. His gaze, keen and intelligent, missed nothing. The frantic searches, the bewildered faces of the officers, the strained press conferences, all were expected. They were merely players in his unfolding masterpiece, reacting predictably to the carefully orchestrated opening movements of his design. Marcus Thorne, Alistair Finch, the unnamed dignitary. Each was a piece of the puzzle, chosen not for their individual power, but for the specific essence they embodied, an essence he deemed corrupt within the fabric of Bermuda. Thorne, Damien mused, his internal monologue a calm, precise narrative, represented the parasitic financial exploitation. He sucked the very lifeblood from the vulnerable, leaving them hollow. A mollusk shell, perfectly formed yet empty, a collector's item from another world, was the perfect symbol for his type. Beautiful on the outside, devoid of true substance within, and utterly alien to the genuine essence of Bermuda. Thorne's disappearance had been a quiet, almost poetic act. A yacht, adrift and aimless, a life untethered from its true course. The ocean, his silent accomplice, had accepted its offering. Finch, his thoughts continued, Michidne was the destroyer of heritage. He wore the mantle of the historian, yet he championed the demolition of the island's past for superficial, modern gain. A wooden long-tailed bird, crafted from the very cedar he sought to erase, its eyes replaced with opaque obsidian, represented the blindness to authentic value, the dark heart of his supposed preservation. Finch, too, had vanished without a trace, spirited away from his home, the very ground he claimed to protect. The land, a silent accomplice, had absorbed its defiler. The dignitary's disappearance, quieter still, was merely a necessary disruption, a global ripple to ensure the island understood the scope of the problem. He represented the insidious, almost invisible corruption that flows through the highest echelons of power, the subtle shift of allegiance from integrity to expediency. Damien had left no artifact for him, for his essence was too ephemeral, too much like the air he breathed, omnipresent yet untouchable. Damien King was not a man driven by petty revenge or random violence. He was an artist, a philosopher, a purveyor of truth. He saw Bermuda not as a collection of pretty houses and pristine beaches, but as a living canvas, its soul scarred by the very forces that claimed to elevate it. He saw the island's history being erased, its natural beauty commodified, its financial core hollowed out by those who valued profit above principle. He believed he was merely correcting the imbalance, creating a new, stark beauty from the ugliness they had wrought. He surveyed his workshop, a sanctuary filled with meticulously crafted objects, tools gleaming on organized benches, exotic woods stacked neatly, rare minerals gleaming in glass cases. Each object held potential, a future message. He had learned from the natural world, from the quiet patience of erosion and the relentless power of the tide. He was not a killer in the conventional sense. He was a sculptor of justice, and his medium was the truth, unveiled in its most shocking form. The police, he knew, would eventually connect the dots, but they would struggle to understand the brushstrokes, the profound, philosophical why. They would see only absence and the chilling, elegant precision, but the whispers would grow, the panic would set in, and the island, slowly but surely, would begin to look inward, to question the very foundations of its perceived paradise. His next victim was already chosen, a woman who epitomized the ultimate superficiality, the corruption of natural form itself, an artist of the artificial. She would be his next lesson in the unveiled truth. He smiled, a thin, satisfied line. The D.A.R.K was just beginning to cast its shadow. Chapter 3, The Tangled Web. The early morning light, usually soft and inviting over the pastel houses of St. George's, felt harsh and unforgiving to Detective Constable Bree Patterson. She stood on the deserted cobblestone street, staring at Alistair Finch's meticulously restored colonial home. The yellow police tape flapped gently in the breeze, a stark contrast to the quiet beauty of the surroundings. Still nothing, Bree, Constable Liam O'Connell, a Bermudian native with a perpetual tan and a growing look of bewilderment, confirmed. Forensics found no forced entry, no trace evidence beyond Finch's own. It's like he opened the door and simply stepped into another dimension. Bree walked up the garden path, her gaze drawn to the precise center of Finch's pristine wooden desk, visible through the large, open window. The carved long-tailed bird sat there, an unnervingly perfect miniature. Its eyes, made of dark, opaque obsidian, seemed to absorb the light, reflecting nothing. This bird, Liam, Bree mused. And Thorne's shell. They're too deliberate, too precise. They're not just calling cards, they're signatures. But what's he signing? Back at the station, the whiteboard in the briefing room was a chaotic spiderweb of names, dates, and speculative connections. Commissioner Vance paced furiously, his face a mottled red. The dignitary's government is demanding answers. Their intel suggests this isn't a random act. There's a pattern, they say. A highly organized, high-level threat to international security. Sinclair Howard, nursing a mug of lukewarm coffee, finally spoke. They're right, Commissioner. There's a pattern. It's subtle, but it's there. And it starts with the victim's public images, or perhaps their perceived flaws. He gestured to Marcus Thorne's profile. Thorne, a financial shark. His image was all about wealth, acquisition, the ruthless pursuit of money. Then to Alistair Finch. Finch, the guardian of history, but a man who championed modern, often destructive, development over genuine preservation. He paused. The dignitary's government claims he was on the verge of exposing a major offshore tax evasion ring. That's a financial thread, Bree nodded, pulling up images of the shell and the bird on a large screen. And the artifacts. The Coronia tritonis shell, rare, beautiful, empty, tied to Thorne. And the carved long-tailed bird, made of old Bermudian cedar, with obsidian eyes, tied to Finch. The shell speaks to empty wealth, something alien to Bermuda's natural state. The bird, a symbol of Bermuda's soul and natural beauty, but crafted from wood being systematically removed and given blind eyes, suggesting a blindness to heritage. Vance scoffed. Symbolism? Howard, Patterson, we're hunting a ghost, and you're talking about art criticism. We need hard evidence. Where are the witnesses? The forensics? The ransom demands? There won't be any, Commissioner, Sinclair stated grimly. Not if this is what we think it is. This isn't about money or simple revenge. This is ideological. This person believes they are correcting a wrong, a deep societal wrong. Dr. Eris Thorne, a forensic psychologist from the UK, called in to assist. A sharp, empathetic woman with piercing blue eyes leaned forward. Detective Howard is onto something, Commissioner. If there are no demands, no physical evidence, and victims disappear, it suggests a highly intelligent, highly organized offender who views their actions as justified. The calling cards are not for ransom. They are for us, for society. He's trying to communicate a message. And the message, as Detective Patterson suggests, seems to be deeply symbolic, tied to the victim's perceived moral transgressions. She paused, her gaze sweeping over the baffled faces in the room. This isn't a typical criminal. This is someone who feels they have been ignored, or that the system has failed to address a profound injustice. They see themselves as a judge, perhaps even an executioner, but more profoundly, as an artist. And their canvas is Bermuda. Liam O'Connell walked in, his brow furrowed. We just got a report from a ferry captain. He found something floating near dockyard this morning. Says it looks like a tiny, perfect glass slipper. Like Cinderella's. Bree's eyes met Sinclair's. More symbolism, she whispered. What does it mean now? The island's idyllic facade was cracking. The whispers were growing louder, evolving from anxiety to fear. The D.A.R.K was tightening his grip, his art becoming clearer, his message more unnerving. Chapter 4. The Glass Slipper's Cruelty. The glass slipper, retrieved from the azure waters near dockyard, was indeed small and exquisitely crafted, shimmering with an ethereal beauty. But its elegance was immediately overshadowed by a chilling detail. It wasn't made of glass at all. Upon closer inspection, forensic analysis revealed it to be constructed from a high-grade polymer resin, molded with uncanny precision to mimic the fragile transparency of glass. And embedded within its delicate heel, almost invisible without magnification, was a single, long, human hair, blonde and unnervingly fine. Sinclair Howard and Bree Patterson stood over the evidence table, their faces grim. Another artifact, Sinclair muttered, tracing the contour of the polymer slipper with a gloved finger. This one feels colder, more artificial. It's a deliberate choice of material, Sinclair, Bree observed, her hazel eyes narrowed in thought. Mimicking natural beauty, but fundamentally artificial. And the single hair, a direct, intimate taunt. This killer is escalating his personal touch. He's telling us he can get close. Dr. Eris Thorne, the forensic psychologist, surveyed the artifact with a somber expression. The Cinderella archetype is about transformation, about finding one's true place, often through an external, magical intervention. But a polymer slipper with a single hair, this is a perversion of that myth. It speaks to artificiality, perhaps a forced transformation, or a cruel illusion. The killer is mocking the very concept of superficial beauty or engineered perfection. Commissioner Vance, besieged by calls from the governor's mansion and the mounting pressure from international governments, slammed his fist on the table. Motive, means, opportunity. Where are they? We have a pattern of victims, a pattern of bizarre trinkets, and absolutely no actionable intelligence. The public is starting to panic. Sinclair spread out the victim profiles on the table. Marcus Thorne, financial exploitation, the empty shell. Alistair Finch, cultural desecration, the blind bird. The British dignitary, offshore corruption, no artifact yet, but the underlying theme of hidden flaws. Now, the polymer slipper, it suggests a new theme. Artificiality, superficiality, the cosmetic facade. Bree pulled up a list of prominent individuals in Bermuda known for their work in fields related to appearance or superficiality. Plastic surgeons, high-end fashion designers, reality TV stars who flaunt their perfect lives, anyone who profits from cultivating an image over substance. We need to widen our search parameters, Liam, Sinclair instructed Constable O'Connell, who was looking increasingly strained. Anyone recently in the news, anyone involved in a public controversy related to image or manufactured beauty, any complaints of malpractice, fraud, or unethical practices. As the investigation broadened, the island's collective anxiety frayed into tangible fear. Tourists began cutting their vacations short. Cruise ship bookings saw a sharp decline. Bermudians, a people known for their resilience, felt the cold tendril of dread coiling around their hearts. The idea of a phantom killer, a silent artist of terror, was chipping away at their sense of security. Meanwhile, Damien Aaron Red King meticulously cleaned his tools, his movements precise and unhurried. He knew they were grasping at threads, trying to weave a tapestry from his individual brushstrokes. They saw the pattern, but not the canvas. Not yet. The polymer slipper had been a delightful touch. She sought to control the uncontrollable time, decay, natural form, he mused, his thoughts a calm, intellectual current. She believed she could sculpt perfection, that artificial beauty was superior to the truth of nature. He imagined the look on the detectives' faces when they realized the true nature of the glass slipper, its cruel illusion. The single strand of hair, a delicate taunt, had been meticulously placed. It belonged to Dr. Evelyn Rhodes, a prominent aesthetic surgeon, a woman who had built an empire on the alteration of the human form, whose own face was a testament to her craft. Her arrogance was profound, Damien thought, a faint, almost imperceptible smile touching his lips. She saw flaws where there was simply natural evolution. She carved away truth for the sake of a fleeting, artificial perfection. He envisioned her meticulous clinic, her perfectly groomed clientele, all seeking to defy the inevitable. She was the ultimate symbol of the superficiality he detested, the next corruption he would cleanse. He had already chosen his next location, a place of profound natural beauty and historical significance, where the artificiality of her methods would be starkly contrasted. A grand statement would be made, a public unveiling of the true nature of her work. The whispers in Bermuda would soon become screams, and the D.A.R.K's art would evolve, from subtle disappearances to undeniable, visceral truths. The island was learning, slowly, painfully, that paradise, once corrupted, had a price. And he was here to collect. Chapter 5. The Unveiling. The pressure on the Bermuda Police Service intensified with each passing hour. The polymer slipper had been confirmed to belong to Dr. Evelyn Rhodes, a renowned aesthetic surgeon, a woman whose own features were a testament to her meticulous craft. She was the fourth target, a woman whose life was built on sculpting artificial beauty, on erasing the marks of time and nature. Commissioner Vance, his voice strained from endless calls, had ordered a 24-hour protection detail for Dr. Rhodes. Armed officers now guarded her clinic and her lavish Paget estate. But the D.A.R.K had proven to be a ghost, appearing and disappearing without a trace, leaving only symbolic clues in his wake. Sinclair Howard and Bree Patterson were holed up in a cramped briefing room, the whiteboard now a chaotic web of connections. Thorne, Finch, the dignitary, now Rhodes, Sinclair muttered, tracing lines between them. Financial exploitation, cultural degradation, offshore corruption, artificial vanity. He's targeting the very foundations of what Bermuda prides itself on: money, history, beauty. He's holding a mirror up to our perceived flaws. And the methods are evolving, Bree added, tapping a pen against the chilling image of the polymer slipper. From vague artifacts to a clear, direct symbol of his victim's profession. The subtlety is fading. He's getting more confident, more aggressive in his messaging. Dr. Eris Thorne, the forensic psychologist, her gaze intense, laid out the profile. He's a highly intelligent, highly organized individual. His actions are not random acts of violence, but ritualistic executions of his ideology. He believes he is enacting a form of justice, cleansing the island of its sins. The progression from disappearance to leaving more personal, symbolic artifacts indicates a desire for his message to be understood. He's a showman, an artist, and he's testing our understanding, our perception of his art. The fact that he's now targeting a woman, breaking his previous pattern of male victims, indicates that the perceived flaw is paramount, not the gender. Liam O'Connell walked in, his face pale. We just got a call from one of Dr. Rhodes' patients. She said Dr. Rhodes canceled all her appointments abruptly this morning. Her staff couldn't reach her. The security detail at her estate reported her missing. Sinclair's blood ran cold. Missing? Despite the protection? He exchanged a horrified glance with Bree. The D.A.R.K had breached their defenses. Again, he was not only elusive, but seemingly omnipotent. Where did she go? Bree demanded, already pulling up Dr. Rhodes' travel records, her financial transactions. Nowhere, Liam replied, shaking his head. Her car is still in the garage. Her passport is on her dresser. It's a clean sweep, just like the others. Commissioner Vance stormed in, his face a furious crimson. Missing? How? We had officers there. This is a catastrophe. The governor is about to call in the military. Bermuda is going to implode. Sinclair tried to remain calm amidst escalating panic. Commissioner, we need to think like him. He's escalating. He left the artifact of the last victim before she went missing. He's making a statement. Where would he unveil his next piece of art? Bree's hazel eyes suddenly focused on a map of Hamilton. He chose a historical location for Finch, a place of natural beauty for Thorne, a prominent social hub for the dignitary. For Rhodes, someone who embodied artificiality, he'll choose a place that contrasts it, a place of natural, untouched beauty, or perhaps a public place that symbolizes purity or history, to highlight the corruption of her methods. Sinclair remembered a particularly scenic spot near a large, central landmark in Hamilton, a place of public gathering known for its beautiful floral displays. Victoria Park, Hamilton. It's central, it's historical, and it's beautiful. It's where he'd make the ultimate public statement about the corruption of natural beauty. A chilling silence descended upon the room. The realization hit them all simultaneously. The D.A.R.K was not just taking his victims. He was preparing a gruesome public display. And it would be revealed in the heart of Bermuda's most beloved park. Chapter 6. The Canvas of Corruption. The pre-dawn light, usually a delicate veil over Bermuda, felt like a suffocating shroud to Dr. Evelyn Rhodes. She stood at the edge of her private infinity pool, its glass-smooth surface reflecting the first hesitant rays of dawn. Her reflection, typically a source of profound satisfaction, seemed subtly distorted this morning. A faint tremor ran through her perfectly toned body, For the past 2 days, she'd felt an inexplicable unease, a prickling sensation on her skin, as if unseen eyes were watching her. It began subtly, a faint, almost imperceptible shimmer in her vision when she glanced at mirrors, a fleeting sense that her reflection was not quite her own. Then came the gifts, not the usual expensive chocolates or floral arrangements from grateful clients. These were different. The first was a single, flawless rose, its petals stiff and unnaturally perfect, left on her clinic's doorstep. Only it wasn't a real rose. It was a highly realistic replica, crafted from a cold, dense polymer. She dismissed it as an oddity, perhaps a disgruntled client's passive aggressive joke. But then, yesterday morning, another gift appeared in her changing room at the clinic, nestled among her freshly laundered scrubs. It was a miniature, exquisitely crafted replica of her own face, no bigger than a thimble. It was perfect in every detail. Her high cheekbones, her full lips, her unnaturally bright blue eyes, but made of a smooth, featureless material, like polished bone. And across one cheek, a hairline crack, almost invisible unless caught in a certain light, marred the otherwise pristine surface. Evelyn, a woman whose life was built on flawless appearances, felt a wave of nausea. She had carefully wrapped it in tissue and locked it away in her personal safe, refusing to acknowledge the unsettling fear it ignited. Now, as she gazed into the pool, she saw a flicker of movement in the water's depths, a shadow too large for a fish, too fluid for a ripple. She blinked, and it was gone. She was Evelyn Rhodes, the sculptor of beauty, the master of her own image. She would not succumb to paranoia, yet the subtle taunts were burrowing deep, exploiting her most profound vulnerability, the control over her own, and others' flawless appearance. Damien Aaron Red King observed Dr. Rhodes from the concealed vantage point of the coastal shrubbery, his high-powered binoculars providing a crystal-clear view of her mounting distress. Her rigid posture, the way her eyes darted, the subtle clench of her jaw, all indicators of a mind under siege. She feels the decay now, Damien mused, his internal voice a calm, intellectual current. She understands the fragility of the facade she presents, the inherent flaw in her manufactured perfection. The truth of her superficiality, of her unnatural alterations, begins to bloom in the fertile soil of her fear. He had chosen the synthetic rose and the tiny, flawed mask of her face with meticulous care, knowing they would strike at the core of her identity. The next step would be more direct, yet still abstract enough to evade conventional understanding. He planned to leave a series of manipulated photographs of her high-profile clients, taken from their public social media, but subtly altered to highlight their post-surgery flaws, exaggerated scars, unnaturally taut skin, or the ghostly echo of their former natural selves. These would be anonymously delivered to her clinic's waiting room, mingled with legitimate magazines, to be discovered by her unsuspecting clients. The aim was to undermine her control, to reveal the true ugly nature of her artistry to her most guarded audience. The whispers would begin, and her perfect world would begin to crumble around her. She seeks to control the uncontrollable time, decay, natural form, Damien concluded, his satisfaction deep. She will learn that true control belongs only to the purveyor of authentic order, and her artificial perfection will lead to her natural dissolution. Chapter 7. The Cracks in the Canvas. The early morning mist, usually a delicate veil over Bermuda, felt like a suffocating shroud to Dr. Evelyn Rhodes. She stood at the edge of her private infinity pool, its glass-smooth surface reflecting the first hesitant rays of dawn. Her reflection, typically a source of profound satisfaction, seemed subtly distorted this morning. A faint tremor ran through her perfectly toned body. For the past 2 days, she'd felt an inexplicable unease, a prickling sensation on her skin, as if unseen eyes were watching her. It began subtly, a faint, almost imperceptible shimmer in her vision when she glanced at mirrors, a fleeting sense that her reflection was not quite her own. Then came the gifts, not the usual expensive chocolates or floral arrangements from grateful clients. These were different. The first was a single, flawless rose, its petals stiff and unnaturally perfect, left on her clinic's doorstep. Only it wasn't a real rose. It was a highly realistic replica, crafted from a cold, dense polymer. She dismissed it as an oddity, perhaps a disgruntled client's passive-aggressive joke. But then, yesterday morning, another gift appeared in her changing room at the clinic, nestled among her freshly laundered scrubs. It was a miniature, exquisitely crafted replica of her own face, no bigger than a thimble. It was perfect in every detail. Her high cheekbones, her full lips, her unnaturally bright blue eyes, but made of a smooth, featureless material, like polished bone. And across one cheek, a hairline crack, almost invisible unless caught in a certain light, marred the otherwise pristine surface. Evelyn, a woman whose life was built on flawless appearances, felt a wave of nausea. She had carefully wrapped it in tissue and locked it away in her personal safe, refusing to acknowledge the unsettling fear it ignited. Now, as she gazed into the pool, she saw a flicker of movement in the water's depths, a shadow too large for a fish, too fluid for a ripple. She blinked, and it was gone. She was Evelyn Rhodes, the sculptor of beauty, the master of her own image. She would not succumb to paranoia, yet the subtle taunts were burrowing deep, exploiting her most profound vulnerability, the control over her own, and others' flawless appearance. Chapter 8. The Unveiling of Horror. The dawn broke not with a gentle caress of light, but with a scream that tore through the pre-morning quiet of Hamilton, shattering the fragile illusion of security that still clung to Bermuda. It was a sound that would echo through the island for years, confirming its darkest fears. Dr. Evelyn Rhodes, the renowned aesthetic surgeon, was found. Her body, meticulously and grotesquely displayed in the historic Victoria Park, laid out on the manicured central flower bed, where vibrant hibiscus and bougainvillea once offered only beauty. She was positioned almost reverently, her impeccably styled hair fanned around her head like a dark halo. Her face, usually a testament to her own meticulous craft, was serene, unnaturally flawless. A chilling, preserved mask. But the serenity was a false front for the horror that lay beneath. A precise surgical incision ran vertically down her torso, perfectly straight, perfectly clean. Her skin, the very canvas of her profession, had been peeled back with chilling exactitude, revealing the raw, glistening musculature beneath, as if she were a perverse anatomical diagram. Her internal organs, exposed, had been rearranged with a chilling, almost artistic symmetry, like a grotesque living sculpture unveiled for public consumption. And where her unnaturally bright, artificial blue eyes should have been, there were now only empty, gaping sockets, filled with the dark, reflective depths of two perfectly smooth, black obsidian stones, identical to the eyes of the wooden long-tailed bird found with Finch. Clutched in her hand, almost tenderly, was the synthetic Easter lily, its single, hairline crack a stark symbol against the horror. The D.A.R.K had escalated. He had moved from vanishing acts to chilling public displays, leaving behind a message too visceral to ignore, too horrifying to misinterpret. Damien Aaron Red King watched the unfolding chaos from a discreet distance, his satisfaction cold and absolute. The morning air, though now filled with the rising crescendo of sirens and frantic voices, felt profoundly serene to him. He had chosen Victoria Park deliberately, a place of natural beauty, meticulously cultivated, now desecrated by the artificial horror he had created. He had needed to make a clearer statement. The subtleties of Thorne and Finch's disappearances, while aesthetically pleasing to him, had failed to ignite the full understanding he desired from the island's populace and its slow, often obtuse protectors. They had seen absence. Now they would see truth. They craved evidence, Damien mused, his internal monologue a calm, unyielding tide. They sought a body, a clear sign of the corruption I eradicate. Very well. I have provided it. A testament to the superficiality she championed, the grotesquerie she inflicted. Her work, her art, was the disfigurement of truth. My work, my art, is the unveiling of that truth. The artificial beauty she so carefully cultivated has been stripped away, revealing the raw, ugly reality beneath. The facade has been destroyed. The ultimate cosmetic surgery performed. The precise, anatomical display, the meticulous arrangement of her internal landscape was a deliberate counterpoint to her external artifice. The removal of her unnatural eyes, replacing them with obsidian, was a specific flourish. She painted the windows to her soul with artificial hues, he thought, a faint, almost imperceptible smile touching his lips. Now she will truly see. Through the dark, unblinking eyes of ancient stone, she will witness the genuine beauty she once defiled. The synthetic lily, with its subtle flaw, was placed for the detectives. It was a direct conversation, a challenge, a testament to his escalating artistry. He had anticipated their immediate connection to Dr. Rhodes's profession, and now he wanted them to see the link, not just in theme, but in the gruesome, deliberate methodology. He was no longer whispering. He was shouting. He turned away, the clamor of the growing crowd fading behind him. His work was done. For now. The island would remember this. This display would burn into its collective consciousness, a permanent scar on its idyllic facade. The D.A.R.K was no longer a phantom. He was a horrifying reality. And the island was ready for its next lesson. Chapter 9. The Serpent in Paradise. The discovery of Dr. Evelyn Rhodes's grotesquely displayed body plunged Bermuda into an abyss of collective terror. The island, once synonymous with serene beauty and tranquil isolation, was now a byword for unspeakable horror. The media frenzy was unprecedented. Helicopters buzzed constantly overhead, their rotors chopping at the already frayed nerves of the populace. International news crews descended, their cameras devouring every detail, every tremor of fear. Tourism, the lifeblood of the island, didn't just plummet. It ceased to exist. Hotels stood empty, their pristine pools reflecting only the grim, overcast sky. Shops shuttered their doors, and the vibrant hues of Bermuda's daily life dulled under a pervasive shadow of dread. The local community, particularly the majority Black population, reacted with a complex mixture of fear, outrage, and a deep-seated spiritual unease. Whispers of Obeah, of ancient curses, mingled with desperate prayers in churches and hushed conversations in homes. There was a sense of profound violation, of something sacred having been irrevocably defiled. Bermuda was no longer a safe haven. It was a hunting ground. Meanwhile, Damien Aaron Red King sat in the quietude of his workshop, the scent of fresh wood shavings and solvent a comforting aroma. The news reports confirmed his success. The island was in full panic. The police, with their new foreign allies, were scrambling, but they still did not fully comprehend the scope of his mission. They see the blood, Damien mused, gently polishing a new, intricate carving. They see the horror. They do not yet see the logic. They do not yet grasp the full tapestry of their transgressions. They still search for a conventional monster. When I am the architect of a necessary reordering, he placed the newly finished carving on a clean, velvet cloth. It was a replica of a Bermuda dollar coin, but intricately carved from a dull, leaden material. The obverse, normally depicting a dignified image of Queen Elizabeth II, was subtly distorted, her face contorted in a silent scream. The reverse, usually displaying a proud sailboat, was shown as a skeletal wreck, its masts splintered, its sails ripped to shreds, foundering in a sea of jagged lines. And embedded within the coin was a minute, fragile shard of glass, glinting like a broken promise. The financial heart of Bermuda, he thought, his gaze fixed on the grim coin, corrupted, hollowed out, shattered by greed and deceit. They see the surface prosperity, the glossy image, but beneath, the true wealth, the journey of this island's people, is foundering, bleeding out. They value numbers above life, profit above principle. And their children, their future, are paying the price. His next target was already chosen, a man who epitomized the hollow pursuit of wealth, a financial executive whose company had systematically destroyed the pension funds of countless Bermudian families, leaving them destitute, their futures shattered like glass. This target was not just a symbol of financial corruption, but of the destruction of the island's most precious resource, its own people, particularly its youth and elderly. This executive was shielded by layers of legal complexity and offshore accounts, untouchable by conventional justice, but not by the D.A.R.K. The coin, dull and grotesque, was a testament to his next correction. And this time, the display would be even more public, even more devastating. He would choose a location that spoke directly to the heart of Bermudian financial power, a place where money flowed like blood, and where the corruption of that flow would be undeniably revealed. The island was learning, slowly, agonizingly, but the lessons were not yet complete. The D.A.R.K. was merely preparing his next, most crucial, and most terrifying piece of art. Chapter 10. The Currency of Despair. The morning after Dr. Rhodes's gruesome display, Bermuda was a coiled spring of fear, stretched taut to its breaking point. The sun rose over deserted streets, the usual symphony of scooters and distant ferry horns replaced by an unnerving silence, punctuated only by the mournful clang of church bells. Schools remained closed indefinitely. Businesses that hadn't already shuttered were now boarded up, and a palpable sense of dread clung to every whisper of wind. The tourism industry was dead, replaced by the grim arrival of FBI and Scotland Yard personnel, their presence a stark reminder that the island was no longer a vacation paradise, but a crime scene of unprecedented horror. Police Commissioner Vance, his face etched with something akin to despair, announced a state of emergency. Curfews were enforced, and uniformed officers, backed by a reluctant detachment of Royal Bermuda Regiment soldiers, patrolled key areas, their presence doing little to assuage the public's profound terror. The calls for martial law grew louder, fueled by frenzied international media reports that painted Bermuda as a descent into madness. Harold Harry Vance, once a titan of finance, was now a trembling, paranoid shadow of his former self. Despite the constant presence of armed guards, he slept little, haunted by the images of his former colleagues' gruesome ends. He dismissed the police's theories about the Port Royal connection as fantastical, preferring to believe in a conventional vendetta, something he could understand. That morning, his guard, a young, inexperienced officer, had stepped away for a moment, answering a frantic call on his radio about a suspicious drone spotted over Dockyard. That moment was all the D.A.R.K needed. Harold Vance's capture was swift, silent, and terrifyingly efficient. He remembered a sharp, acrid smell, a searing pain, and then a profound, suffocating darkness. He awoke to the sound of crashing waves, the smell of salt and decay, and a chilling awareness of being suspended, his body numb with a strange, unnatural cold. The call came in at 6:02 a.m. Sinclair Howard, barely having caught a few hours of uneasy sleep at the station, jolted awake to the frantic voice of Liam O'Connell. Detective Howard, it's another one. Arthur Bellingham, Bermuda Stock Exchange lobby. And, God, Sinclair, you won't believe it. It's worse than Rhodes. Sinclair felt a cold dread seep into his bones, even before Liam's grim pronouncement. I'm on my way. Secure the scene. No one touches anything. He grabbed his jacket, running a hand through his hair, already calculating the next wave of panic. He called Bree, his voice tight. It's Bellingham. Get to the stock exchange. Now, the scene at the stock exchange was utter pandemonium. Sirens wailed. Uniformed officers struggled to hold back a rapidly growing, horrified crowd. News helicopters already hovered, their cameras zooming in on the spectacle within the glass lobby. Sinclair pushed past the barricade, his stomach clenching at the first sight of Bellingham's grotesque pose. Bree arrived moments later, her face blanching, her hazel eyes widening in horror as she took in the scene. The meticulous dismemberment, the chains, the shredded money, the glass shards. It was a tableau of absolute despair. Oh my God, she whispered, her voice barely audible. He's disassembled him, like a broken financial instrument. This is beyond gruesome, Sinclair. It's a statement of complete and utter liquidation. Sinclair knelt, examining the leaden coin at Bellingham's feet, the distorted queen, the skeletal sailboat. He touched the shard of glass embedded in it. This is it, Bree. This is the pattern. Thorn, financial predator, mollusk, vanished. Finch, historical vandal, wooden bird, vanished. Rhodes, artificial beauty, synthetic lily, publicly displayed. And now Bellingham, financial destroyer, broken coin, publicly displayed. He's telling us their specific sins, their flaws. He's judging them, and he's displaying his judgments for the world to see. Special Agent Jensen and Detective Inspector Sharma arrived, their faces grim. Jensen immediately went to work, shouting orders, his analytical mind trying to impose order on the chaos. Sharma, however, stood silently, observing the scene, her gaze lingering on the details of the display. This is an undeniable escalation, Sharma stated, her voice quiet but firm. The disappearances were a warning. The Rhodes display was a declaration. This is a manifesto. He wants to tear down the very foundations of Bermuda, starting with its perceived moral and systemic failures, financial corruption, historical erasure, superficiality. She looked at Sinclair and Bree. You were right about the symbolism, detectives. This is beyond profiling. This is a narrative, and we need to read it. Dr. Lena Hansen, the profiler, arrived shortly after, her professional demeanor barely masking her shock. He's making them become their flaws, she murmured, her eyes scanning Bellingham's body. Rhodes was dissected, her superficiality laid bare. Bellingham is dismantled. literally representing the broken promises and liquidated futures he created. This is a very specific, very personal form of retribution. He views himself as an agent of true justice, repairing the moral fabric of the island. Jensen, however, was already speaking into his comms. Get forensic teams in here. We need every fiber, every print, every possible trace. He handled that body meticulously. He must have left something. And let's get a full financial audit on Bellingham, every penny, every connection. There has to be a conventional link. Bree looked at Jensen, a flicker of exasperation in her hazel eyes. Agent Jensen, the link isn't conventional. It's ideological. It's what Bellingham did to Bermuda, not just who he knew. He ruined lives. He corrupted trust. He took our financial stability and shattered it. Sinclair placed a hand on Bree's arm. She's right. We're dealing with a ghost of Bermuda's conscience, a phantom who is trying to force us to confront our own corruption. He's taking the people he deems responsible for tainting the island, and he's turning them into living or dead metaphors. He picked up the leaden coin. Its chilling symbolism now undeniable. And he's not going to stop until he's finished his collection. Commissioner Vance, observing the horrifying spectacle and the strained interactions of his team, simply shook his head. My God, he repeated, his voice barely a whisper. How many more must suffer before we catch this serpent in paradise? The question hung heavy in the air, unanswered, as the chilling reality of the D.A.R.K's escalating spree gripped the island. The fear in Bermuda was no longer a murmur. It was a deafening roar. Protests erupted in the streets, demanding protection, justice, and the immediate apprehension of the monster. The fragile peace of the island shattered, replaced by a raw, desperate energy. Everyone was looking for a savior or a scapegoat, and the D.A.R.K. watched, patiently, for the ripples of his art to spread further across the tormented waters of Bermuda. His next victim, another symbol, another lesson, was already in his sights. Chapter 11, The Eightfold Knot. Bermuda was no longer merely afraid, it was unraveling. The discovery of Arthur Bellingham's dismantled body, a grotesque sculpture of financial ruin displayed in the heart of Hamilton's financial district, had pushed the island beyond panic into outright hysteria. The tourism industry was a ghost, its infrastructure crumbling under the weight of cancellations. Local businesses, facing bankruptcy, had laid off swaths of staff. Schools remained closed, parents too terrified to send their children outside. The silence of the once bustling streets was eerie, punctuated only by the distant wail of sirens or the rumble of armored vehicles carrying heavily armed foreign officers. The government, under immense pressure, had imposed a strict island-wide curfew, a measure unprecedented in Bermuda's modern history. Whispers of a mass exodus turned into desperate plans, but international flights were scarce, and the cost prohibitive. The sense of being trapped on a rapidly shrinking, terror-stricken rock was pervasive. Commissioner Vance, his face now permanently etched with defeat, had all but relinquished control of the investigation to the arriving foreign agencies. The temporary incident room in the St. George's police station, now a joint command center, throbbed with a frenetic, desperate energy. Maps of Bermuda were covered in red markers, connecting crime scenes, victim addresses, and the bizarre locations where the D.A.R.K. had left his chilling clues. Dr. Lena Hansen, the FBI profiler, worked tirelessly, her sharp mind trying to map the twisted pathways of the killer's psyche. Detective Inspector Anya Sharma of Scotland Yard, methodical and precise, sifted through every financial, historical, and personal detail of the victims, seeking a pattern beyond the obvious. Special Agent Mark Jensen, however, remained rooted in conventional police work, his frustration palpable as the forensic leads continued to yield nothing but dead ends. Sinclair Howard, fueled by endless cups of strong coffee and a raw sense of urgency, felt his own mind racing, trying to keep pace with the sheer scale of the horror. Bree Patterson, her hazel eyes glued to a screen displaying digitized architectural plans, was the engine of their local effort, cross-referencing databases, poring over historical documents, and connecting seemingly disparate facts. They were both running on pure adrenaline and a growing, desperate need to stop the architect of this madness. He's escalating, Dr. Hansen stated during a late-night briefing, her voice low and grave. From disappearances to elaborate public displays. The message is getting clearer, more visceral. Thorne, Finch, Rhodes, Bellingham. They represent greed, cultural desecration, artificiality, and financial ruin. These aren't just individuals. They are symbolic pillars of Bermuda's perceived corruption. Jensen tapped his pen against a file. But what ties them together beyond this philosophical umbrella? A common organization? A specific event? We have nothing concrete. No shared business. No direct personal connections. No single conspiracy. Bree, tracing lines on a large map of Hamilton, spoke without looking up. That's because the connection isn't overt. It's underlying. It's what they did to Bermuda. They're all part of a systemic decay. But it feels like a response to something bigger. Sharma, leaning over a desk covered in Bermudian historical texts, looked up. Exactly. Serial offenders often respond to a deep-seated grievance, a pivotal event, a perceived betrayal that they feel was unpunished, unresolved. These victims could be proxies, representing different facets of a single, larger injustice. We need to look for a historical wound that touches all these themes. Sinclair ran a hand through his hair, a sudden thought sparking in his mind. A wound, a single catastrophic event that caused multiple forms of damage: financial, historical, cultural, aesthetic. Something that would still resonate deeply with a Bermudian. A scandal, a major project, something that happened, say, a few years back. Something that involves numbers, money, land, and image, Bree added, her voice a low hum of concentration. She started pulling up old news archives, scanning headlines for large-scale controversies. A resort development? A major government project? Dr. Hansen stepped forward. The D.A.R.K sees himself as a restorer of balance. He views Bermuda as his canvas. His victims are the corrupted elements. If this is a response to a single deep wound, then there might have been a set number of key players, key figures involved in that initial betrayal. She paused, her gaze sweeping across the room. We need to look for a specific controversy, a large-scale project that touched multiple facets of Bermudian life. Perhaps one that was highly contentious and ultimately failed, or had disastrous consequences for the community. Liam O'Connell, who had been quietly compiling cold cases from the past 2 decades, spoke up tentatively. There was the Port Royal Project, a huge luxury resort and marina expansion that was supposed to redefine tourism in the West End. Massive government investment, private developers, promised jobs, environmental impact concerns, historical site disputes. It imploded about 8 years ago, left a huge, unfinished mess. Sinclair's head snapped towards Liam. Port Royal. That's it. The financial losses, the land speculation, the destruction of pristine coastline, the aesthetic monstrosity of the unfinished buildings, the historical disputes over certain sites, and the promises of jobs that never materialized, leaving thousands impacted. Bree was already typing furiously. Marcus Thorne's company was deeply involved in the financing, acquiring local businesses and land. Alistair Finch's firm was contracted for the initial architectural design, controversial for its modern, un-Bermudian style. Dr. Evelyn Rhodes, her clinic was part of a proposed luxury health spa complex meant to complement the resort, a huge vanity project that never broke ground, but symbolized the false promises of opulence. And Arthur Bellingham's firm, Sharma added, her eyes now alight with understanding, was instrumental in advising on the pension fund investments tied into the project, the very funds that collapsed when the project failed. The pieces clicked into place with a horrifying precision. This wasn't just a pattern of flaws. It was a targeted retribution for a specific traumatic event in Bermuda's recent history. How many primary figures were involved in the initial Port Royal Development Consortium? Dr. Hansen asked, her voice hushed. The core leadership, the ones who pushed it through, despite the opposition. Bree scrolled through old government reports, her fingers flying. Let's see. The consortium had a CEO, a chief financial officer, head of development, lead architect, legal counsel, public relations head, and 2 key government liaisons who pushed the legislation through. Total of 8 primary figures. A sudden, chilling silence fell over the room. The number hung in the air, a cold, undeniable confirmation of their worst fears. 8. Not just 3 victims, but 8 potential targets. And the D.A.R.K had already claimed 4. The original 8 sins of Port Royal. Damien Aaron Red King watched the unfolding news reports from his secluded hideaway, a faint smile playing on his lips. They were starting to see. The analysts, the detectives, the outsiders. They were finally beginning to connect the fragments of his grand design. The panic was reaching a fever pitch, exactly as he intended. The island was purging itself, convulsing under the weight of its unacknowledged sins. They finally comprehend the scale of the original wound, he thought, his gaze fixed on a framed photograph of the unfinished skeletal remains of the Port Royal development, concrete and twisted rebar rusting under the harsh Bermudian sun. The 8 individuals who orchestrated that defilement, that grotesque mockery of Bermuda's soul. 4 have been cleansed. 4 remain. He turned his attention to a carefully laid out map of the island, marked with red crosses where his victims had been found. Next to it, a small, highly detailed model of the Port Royal development. His finger traced a path to the 3 remaining figures on his list, each representing a distinct aspect of the project's betrayal: the former CEO, a legal counsel, and one of the original government liaisons. The 4th, the head of PR, he would deal with later, for his betrayal was of a different kind. The previous victims had been carefully chosen to reveal the scope of the problem. Now he would complete his purification of the original 8. The former CEO, who embodied the initial greedy vision, would be his next focus. The location for his final display would be chosen with ultimate precision, a place that would scream the truth of the Port Royal disaster to the entire island, a final, undeniable testament to the D.A.R.K's cleansing fire. He would make sure they understood, beyond any doubt, the meaning of his art. The tension in the air was thick, a tangible pressure that threatened to crack the very foundations of Bermuda. The hunt was on, a desperate race against an artist whose canvas was the island itself, and whose medium was fear. The D.A.R.K. was preparing his masterpiece, and the remaining figures of the Port Royal Consortium, unaware of the eightfold knot that bound them, were merely counting down to their final, horrifying revelation. Chapter 12. The Concrete Tomb. The image of Harold Vance, entombed in concrete, became the indelible symbol of Bermuda's torment. The public sphere had metastasized into raw fury, directed equally at the elusive D.A.R.K. and a government perceived as powerless. Calls for the governor's resignation intensified. Protests turned violent in some parishes, and a low hum of rebellion vibrated beneath the surface of the island's forced calm. International news outlets ran chilling headlines: Paradise Lost, Bermuda's Nightmare, the Serpent in the City. At the heart of the storm, the Joint Task Force was now a hyper-efficient, if exhausted, machine. The Port Royal project was their Rosetta Stone, the key to unlocking the D.A.R.K's twisted narrative. Every available officer, Bermudian and foreign alike, was assigned to sifting through the mountain of documentation: financial records, construction manifests, environmental impact assessments, public consultation reports, even old protest sign-up sheets. "We're looking for a confluence," Dr. Lena Hansen explained, her voice tight from lack of sleep. "Someone with a deep personal connection to Port Royal's failure. Someone who suffered profoundly, financially, professionally, emotionally, and crucially, someone with the specific skills evident in the crime scenes: intricate carving, precision with materials like polymers, knowledge of construction, and artistic inclination." Sinclair Howard, his suit jacket discarded, sleeves rolled up, and Bree Patterson, her hazel eyes glued to a screen displaying digitized architectural plans, worked side by side, their collaboration almost telepathic. Liam O'Connell, his local knowledge proving invaluable, was interviewing former Port Royal construction workers, many of whom still harbored bitter resentment over unpaid wages and lost jobs. "Hundreds of names on these contractor lists," Liam reported, his voice weary but determined. Thousands of laborers, most of them Bermudian, many of them deeply hurt by the project's collapse. Financial ruin, foreclosures, families broken. It's a lot of potential anger. Jensen, still focused on data, had set up complex algorithms to cross-reference financial ruin against art degrees or engineering licenses. But the sheer volume of data and the lack of a clear criminal profile beyond intelligent and angry was proving difficult. "We have no forensic signature," he reiterated, thumping a fist lightly on the desk. "No DNA, no identifiable prints. Nothing. He's meticulous. He is meticulous because this is personal," Sharma countered, poring over blueprints that detailed complex hydrological systems for the abandoned marina. "He knows this site intimately. The rebar, the concrete mix, the way those columns were poured for Vance. It speaks to deep practical knowledge, perhaps even a sense of possessiveness over the site itself. Bree suddenly froze, her finger hovering over a detail on one of the archived architectural plans. Look at this, an early concept for a central sculpture garden at Port Royal. Before the budget cuts, it was designed by a local artist, a sculptor named D.A.R.K. He had a reputation for intricate carvings, blending natural Bermudian elements with modern materials. His proposals were ambitious, expensive. The project was eventually shelved, and he was publicly critical of the consortium's shift towards cheaper, mass-produced art installations. Sinclair leaned in, his eyes widening. Damien Aaron King? The initials D.A.R.K.? Sharma's head snapped up. And his proposed sculptures? Did they involve specific materials? Polymers? Concrete? Bree nodded, scrolling quickly. Yes. His designs explicitly called for, quote, high-grade polymer resin, weathered Bermudian cedar, indigenous marine shells, and polished local stone. He was known for integrating Bermuda's natural history into his contemporary art, and he had a particular fascination with the enduring beauty of the natural form versus the superficiality of artificial alteration. She looked up, her voice a hushed whisper. He even designed a series called The Unveiling, where faces would be partially peeled back to reveal the skull beneath, as a commentary on superficiality. And he had an exhibit proposal of a shattered economy, where the centerpiece was a giant fractured Bermudian dollar coin. The room fell silent. Every symbolic clue left by the D.A.R.K, the mollusk shell, the wooden bird, the synthetic lily, the distorted Bermudian dollar coin, the replaced eyes, the exposed flesh, perfectly aligned with the artistic philosophy and past proposals of Damien Aaron King. Check his financial records, Jensen ordered, his skepticism finally giving way to grim acceptance. Check his connections to the Port Royal project. Any lawsuits? Any bankruptcies? Liam spoke up, his voice trembling. I remember him, Damien King. He was a prominent artist. Got a lot of press for his protests against Port Royal. His main gallery went bankrupt a few years ago. He blamed the economic downturn caused by the project, said it drained the lifeblood out of the island's true creators. And his family? Dr. Hansen pressed. Any history of mental illness? Any significant trauma? Liam, now looking through a digital database, found an old article. His brother, he was a Port Royal construction worker. Lost his entire pension, everything, when the project failed. He committed suicide not long after. Left a note saying he felt drained, stripped bare. The puzzle clicked into place, piece by horrifying piece. Damien Aaron King, the artist, the aggrieved brother, the financial ruin, the intimate knowledge of the site, the specific artistic obsessions, the D.A.R.K. Sinclair felt a chill run down his spine. He's not just an artist, he's a grieving brother, a ruined man. He's doing this for revenge, for his brother, for all the others financially destroyed, for Bermuda itself. He believes he's performing a cleansing. He looked at Bree. We found him, but we also just confirmed his motive and his ultimate goal. And how many of the original Port Royal Consortium figures remain? Sharma asked, her gaze sweeping across the grim faces in the room. Bree scrolled through her list. Simone Dubois, legal counsel. Roger Finch, head of development. David Perch, government liaison. 3 left, and the head of PR. His betrayal of a different kind, as he thought earlier. A cold dread settled over Sinclair. If he's been methodical, if he's trying to finish his art, who's next? And where would he make his final grand statement? Damien Aaron King, now more artist than man, felt an exhilarating hum of triumph. The fools were closing in, but they were too late. Harry Vance had been his grand statement on economic decay. Now only 3 of the original 8 remained, but only one of them would be the subject of his ultimate, final piece, the crescendo of his truth. He stood in his secluded workshop, the scent of wood and metal sharp in the air. His gaze fell upon a meticulously crafted, oversized replica of an ancient Bermudian longtail boat carved from a single gnarled piece of cedar. But this boat was different. It was incomplete, hollowed out, its interior filled not with sails or seats, but with a complex network of tiny, sharp metal spikes, glistening like teeth. Within its hollow, carefully placed, were a multitude of miniature human figures, sculpted from a dull gray clay, twisted and contorted in silent agony, their forms indistinct, their faces blank. The vessel of broken promises, Damien mused, his eyes gleaming with a profound, terrifying satisfaction. The ultimate betrayal of trust. They hollowed out the very heart of the island's future, leaving nothing but sharp edges and nameless, faceless suffering. David Perch, the government liaison, was their loudest voice, their public face of deceit. He sold the false dream, promising prosperity where there would only be ruin. David Perch, once a charismatic politician, now lived in a state of perpetual lockdown, surrounded by armed guards. He was the next target, and his demise would be the most public, most devastating revelation yet. Damien had chosen the location for his final, grand unveiling, the steps of the cabinet office in Hamilton, the very seat of Bermudian power, the place where promises were made and often broken. It would be his final, irrefutable monument to the deep-seated corruption that had festered within the heart of the island. The hunt was narrowing, the air thick with anticipation. The detectives were closing in, but Damien Aaron King was preparing his masterpiece. And the ultimate truth of the D.A.R.K was about to be revealed. Chapter 13. The Final Tableau. The name Damien Aaron King exploded across the task force like a shockwave. The pieces, once scattered and disparate, now snapped into a terrifyingly coherent whole. The initials D.A.R.K were no longer a cipher, but a chilling signature. His artistic vision, his personal tragedy, his intimate knowledge of Bermuda's veins and arteries, all converged on one terrifying purpose: a brutal symbolic cleansing of the island's perceived sins, culminating in the complete dismemberment of the Port Royal Consortium. The remaining three targets, Simone Dubois, Roger Finch, and David Perch, were placed under even tighter, nearly impenetrable security. But the immediate threat, the final, most devastating act, was clear. David Perch, the government liaison who had been the public face of the Port Royal betrayal. And the location for Damien's final, grand statement, the cabinet office in Hamilton, the very heart of Bermudian governance. He'll choose a public place, Sinclair Howard declared, his voice tight with adrenaline. The cabinet office steps. It's where Perch would have made his promises, where the island's faith was placed. It's the ultimate stage for Damien's message. Secure the cabinet office. Commissioner Vance bellowed into his phone, his face a mask of desperate command. Every entrance, every approach. Nobody in, nobody out. Perch is detailed. Redouble your efforts. This is it. This is his final act. Bree Patterson, her hazel eyes alight with a terrifying clarity, pulled up blueprints of the cabinet office. He'll want to maximize the impact. He'll make sure it's visible. He knows the city like the back of his hand. He'll use an approach that bypasses typical security measures, or he'll create a diversion. Agent Jensen, now fully invested in the ideological hunt, coordinated police and regiment forces to converge on the cabinet office, while Detective Inspector Sharma and Dr. Lena Hansen frantically analyzed Damien King's known artistic works, searching for clues about his final, grand design. Liam O'Connell, pale and shaken but resolute, organized patrols around known artists' studios and abandoned warehouses, places where Damien might have prepared his morbid props. Damien Aaron King moved with a chilling calm, the pre-dawn darkness his willing accomplice. The intensified security around the cabinet office was an inconvenience, not an impediment. He had studied every shadow, every blind spot, every shift change for weeks. The chaos he had wrought had already pulled vital resources away, stretching the police thin. And David Perch, for all his armed guards, was a predictable man of routine. He found Perch in his safe room, a fortified bunker in his secure residence, moments after the politician's personal security team had been subtly, yet effectively, incapacitated by a precisely orchestrated series of minor electrical disruptions and strategically placed smoke grenades, creating a momentary, disorienting chaos. Perch, mid-sentence on a frantic call to his superior, looked up, his eyes widening in pure, unadulterated terror as Damien, a dark, silent silhouette, stepped into the room. "The vessel of broken promises, Mr. Perch," Damien murmured, his voice soft, almost regretful, utterly devoid of emotion. "It awaits its final passenger." The call came in at 7:15 a.m. A construction worker, brave enough to check on some salvageable equipment at the abandoned Port Royal site, had stumbled upon a scene that would forever haunt his waking nightmares. Sinclair, Bree, Jensen, Sharma, and Dr. Hansen raced to the site, the sirens echoing mournfully across the devastated landscape. The once grand entrance to the resort was now a rusting gate, overgrown with weeds. Beyond it, a skeletal framework of concrete and rebar rose against the sky, a monument to the D.A.R.K's next horrifying piece. And there he was. Harold Harry Vance, the former CEO, was displayed in a way that truly redefined grotesque. He was not simply laid out, he was integrated into the very structure of the failed dream he had championed. His body had been stripped naked and meticulously encased, torso down, in a hastily poured, partially cured concrete column, which had been raised and set upright amidst the skeletal remains of one of the unfinished resort blocks. Only his head and arms protruded from the top of the column, his face frozen in a rictus of terror, eyes wide and unblinking, now replaced by two gleaming polished brass ingots. His arms were outstretched, as if still reaching for the vast, empty expanse of the sea, or desperately begging for salvation. Around the base of the concrete column, dozens of miniature, intricately carved representations of the Port Royal Resort's original blueprints and marketing brochures were scattered, all of them meticulously shattered, crumpled, or burned at the edges. And near the column's base, visible in the harsh morning light, was the leaden Bermuda dollar coin, the contorted queen's face turned towards the sea, the skeletal sailboat pointing directly at Vance. Embedded firmly in the concrete near his head was a single, rusted piece of rebar, polished to a dull shine at its tip, like a macabre spike. Sinclair felt his breath catch in his throat. This wasn't just murder. It was the ultimate, horrifying judgment. He's made him part of the failure, he breathed, his voice raw. A monument to his own greed. He's literally encased him in the very symbol of his corruption. Bree, her face pale, knelt to examine the scene, her hazel eyes scanning every detail with a chilling calm. The brass ingot's currency, his golden vision, and the rebar, the very skeleton of the project, used to finalize his art. He's telling us that Vance is now part of the monument to the island's broken dream. She looked up at Sinclair, a desperate understanding in her gaze. This is the culmination of his hatred for Port Royal. He's making them embody the destruction they caused. Jensen, usually composed, visibly recoiled, a hand over his mouth. My God, this is beyond anything. He's not just killing them, he's creating installations. He's literally making them monuments to their own damnation. Sharma, however, was already moving, examining the fresh concrete. This would have required significant time, specialized tools, and knowledge of this site. He's not just an artist, he's an engineer of death. He knows construction. He knows materials. He had access to this site. She pointed to faint, precise tool marks on the rebar and the concrete. These are fresh, very distinctive. Dr. Hansen, her voice tight with professional focus, began dictating notes into a recorder. The deliberate choice of the site, the integration of the victim into the failed project structure, the use of industrial materials, this isn't just about symbolic retribution. This is also about the D.A.R.K's intimate knowledge of construction, of the Port Royal site itself. He likely worked here, or was deeply involved in it, perhaps even financially ruined by it. He's literally using the materials of his own trauma. A chilling thought struck Sinclair. If the D.A.R.K had worked on the site, if he had been emotionally or financially devastated by Port Royal, then he knew its every crevice, every hidden path, every weakness. He was not just an artist, he was a ghost, haunting his own ruined past. He knows this place, Sinclair echoed, his voice grim. He knows the layout, the security, the shortcuts. He was part of it, a victim of it, perhaps. This isn't just about the flaws of the victims. It's about his own pain being reflected in their deaths. He looked at Bree, a new, unsettling possibility forming in his mind. If he worked on Port Royal, there would be records. Employment records. Contractors. Workers who were never paid. He could be anyone, Bree nodded, her hazel eyes wide with the same realization. And the remaining targets. Dubois, Roger Finch, Perch. We need to secure them even tighter. And we need to go back to the Port Royal records, every single person connected to that project. Not just the top brass, but the engineers, the foremen, the subcontractors. The workers who were laid off, the families who lost everything, the ones who would feel this betrayal most keenly. The island plunged into a new depth of despair. The visual horror of Harold Vance, entombed in concrete, was burned into every Bermudian's mind. The government issued increasingly desperate pleas for calm, but they fell on deaf ears. The fear had curdled into a volatile mix of anger and grief. International calls for evacuation increased. Bermuda was on the brink. The D.A.R.K, watching the chaos from his vantage point, felt a surge of grim satisfaction. His message was finally sinking in. The monuments of their sins were rising, one by one. The original 8 were almost complete. His ultimate act, the final piece in his grand, horrifying design, would soon be ready. And then, Bermuda would truly be cleansed. Chapter 14. The Unmasking of Shadows. The name Damien Aaron King exploded across the task force like a shockwave. The pieces, once scattered and disparate, now snapped into a terrifyingly coherent whole. The initials D.A.R.K were no longer a cipher, but a chilling signature. His artistic vision, his personal tragedy, his intimate knowledge of Bermuda's veins and arteries, all converged on one terrifying purpose: a brutal symbolic cleansing of the island's perceived sins, culminating in the complete dismemberment of the Port Royal Consortium. The remaining 3 targets, Simone Dubois, Roger Finch, and David Perch, were placed under even tighter, nearly impenetrable security. But the immediate threat, the final, most devastating act, was clear. David Perch, the government liaison who had been the public face of the Port Royal betrayal. And the location for Damien's final, grand statement: the Cabinet Office in Hamilton, the very heart of Bermudian governance. He'll choose a public place, Sinclair Howard declared, his voice tight with adrenaline. The Cabinet Office steps. It's where Perch would have made his promises, where the island's faith was placed. It's the ultimate stage for Damien's message. Secure the Cabinet Office. Commissioner Vance bellowed into his phone, his face a mask of desperate command. Every entrance, every approach. Nobody in, nobody out. Perch is detailed. Redouble your efforts. This is it. This is his final act. Bree Patterson, her hazel eyes alight with a terrifying clarity, pulled up blueprints of the Cabinet Office. He'll want to maximize the impact. He'll make sure it's visible. He knows the city like the back of his hand. He'll use an approach that bypasses typical security measures, or he'll create a diversion. Agent Jensen, now fully invested in the ideological hunt, coordinated police and regiment forces to converge on the Cabinet Office, while Detective Inspector Sharma and Dr. Lena Hansen frantically analyzed Damien King's known artistic works, searching for clues about his final, grand design. Liam O'Connell, pale and shaken but resolute, organized patrols around known artists' studios and abandoned warehouses, places where Damien might have prepared his morbid props. Damien Aaron King moved with a chilling calm, the pre-dawn darkness his willing accomplice. The intensified security around the Cabinet Office was an inconvenience, not an impediment. He had studied every shadow, every blind spot, every shift change for weeks. The chaos he had wrought had already pulled vital resources away, stretching the police thin. And David Perch, for all his armed guards, was a predictable man of routine. He found Perch in his safe room, a fortified bunker in his secure residence, moments after the politician's personal security team had been subtly, yet effectively, incapacitated by a precisely orchestrated series of minor electrical disruptions and strategically placed smoke grenades, creating a momentary, disorienting chaos. Perch, mid-sentence on a frantic call to his superior, looked up, his eyes widening in pure, unadulterated terror as Damien, a dark, silent silhouette, stepped into the room. "The vessel of broken promises, Mr. Perch," Damien murmured, his voice soft, almost regretful, utterly devoid of emotion. "It awaits its final passenger." The call came in at 7:15 a.m. A construction worker, brave enough to check on some salvageable equipment at the abandoned Port Royal site, had stumbled upon a scene that would forever haunt his waking nightmares. Sinclair, Bree, Jensen, Sharma, and Dr. Hansen raced to the site, the sirens echoing mournfully across the devastated landscape. The once grand entrance to the resort was now a rusting gate, overgrown with weeds. Beyond it, a skeletal framework of concrete and rebar rose against the sky, a monument to the D.A.R.K's next horrifying piece. And there he was. Harold Harry Vance, the former CEO, was displayed in a way that truly redefined grotesque. He was not simply laid out, he was integrated into the very structure of the failed dream he had championed. His body had been stripped naked and meticulously encased, torso down, in a hastily poured, partially cured concrete column, which had been raised and set upright amidst the skeletal remains of one of the unfinished resort blocks. Only his head and arms protruded from the top of the column, his face frozen in a rictus of terror, eyes wide and unblinking, now replaced by two gleaming polished brass ingots. His arms were outstretched, as if still reaching for the vast, empty expanse of the sea, or desperately begging for salvation. Around the base of the concrete column, dozens of miniature, intricately carved representations of the Port Royal Resort's original blueprints and marketing brochures were scattered, all of them meticulously shattered, crumpled, or burned at the edges. And near the column's base, visible in the harsh morning light, was the leaden Bermuda dollar coin, the contorted queen's face turned towards the sea, the skeletal sailboat pointing directly at Vance. Embedded firmly in the concrete near his head was a single, rusted piece of rebar, polished to a dull shine at its tip, like a macabre spike. Sinclair felt his breath catch in his throat. This wasn't just murder. It was the ultimate, horrifying judgment. He's made him part of the failure, he breathed, his voice raw. A monument to his own greed. He's literally encased him in the very symbol of his corruption. Bree, her face pale, knelt to examine the scene, her hazel eyes scanning every detail with a chilling calm. The brass ingot's currency, his golden vision, and the rebar, the very skeleton of the project, used to finalize his art. He's telling us that Vance is now part of the monument to the island's broken dream. She looked up at Sinclair, a desperate understanding in her gaze. This is the culmination of his hatred for Port Royal. He's making them embody the destruction they caused. Jensen, usually composed, visibly recoiled, a hand over his mouth. My God, this is beyond anything. He's not just killing them, he's creating installations. He's literally making them monuments to their own damnation. Sharma, however, was already moving, examining the fresh concrete. This would have required significant time, specialized tools, and knowledge of this site. He's not just an artist, he's an engineer of death. He knows construction. He knows materials. He had access to this site. She pointed to faint, precise tool marks on the rebar and the concrete. These are fresh, very distinctive. Dr. Hansen, her voice tight with professional focus, began dictating notes into a recorder. The deliberate choice of the site, the integration of the victim into the failed project structure, the use of industrial materials, this isn't just about symbolic retribution. This is also about the D.A.R.K's intimate knowledge of construction, of the Port Royal site itself. He likely worked here, or was deeply involved in it, perhaps even financially ruined by it. He's literally using the materials of his own trauma. A chilling thought struck Sinclair. If the D.A.R.K had worked on the site, if he had been emotionally or financially devastated by Port Royal, then he knew its every crevice, every hidden path, every weakness. He was not just an artist, he was a ghost, haunting his own ruined past. He knows this place, Sinclair echoed, his voice grim. He knows the layout, the security, the shortcuts. He was part of it, a victim of it, perhaps. This isn't just about the flaws of the victims. It's about his own pain being reflected in their deaths. He looked at Bree, a new, unsettling possibility forming in his mind. If he worked on Port Royal, there would be records. Employment records. Contractors. Workers who were never paid. He could be anyone, Bree nodded, her hazel eyes wide with the same realization. And the remaining targets. Dubois, Roger Finch, Perch. We need to secure them even tighter. And we need to go back to the Port Royal records, every single person connected to that project. Not just the top brass, but the engineers, the foremen, the subcontractors, the workers who were laid off, the families who lost everything, the ones who would feel this betrayal most keenly. The island plunged into a new depth of despair. The visual horror of Harold Vance, entombed in concrete, was burned into every Bermudian's mind. The government issued increasingly desperate pleas for calm. but they fell on deaf ears. The fear had curdled into a volatile mix of anger and grief. International calls for evacuation increased. Bermuda was on the brink. The D.A.R.K., watching the chaos from his vantage point, felt a surge of grim satisfaction. His message was finally sinking in. The monuments of their sins were rising, one by one. The original 8 were almost complete. His ultimate act, the final piece in his grand, horrifying design, would soon be ready. And then, Bermuda would truly be cleansed. Chapter 15. Epilogue. The Scarred Paradise. The immediate aftermath of D.A.R.K. King's death was a cacophony of relief and raw grief. The state of emergency was lifted, the curfew rescinded, and the foreign investigators slowly began to pack their bags. The island breathed a collective, shuddering sigh. The D.A.R.K. was gone. The terror had ended, but the silence that followed was heavy, laden with the weight of unspeakable horrors. Bermuda was safe, but irrevocably changed. The vibrant hues of its landscape now seemed muted, as if the island itself had been drained of its color. The laughter of children no longer echoed freely in the parks. Parents still clutched their hands too tightly, their eyes scanning shadows. The once bustling streets of Hamilton, though no longer deserted, moved with a subdued, wary rhythm. The images of Dr. Evelyn Rhodes, Arthur Bellingham, and David Perch, their bodies transformed into grotesque artistic statements, were burned into the collective consciousness of Bermudians. The Cabinet Office steps, once a symbol of governance, became a grim monument to a terrifying truth. Cleanup crews worked diligently, but the psychological scars were too deep to simply wash away. Tourism, the island's economic backbone, was decimated. Hotels remained largely empty, ferry services ran skeletal schedules, and the bustling markets were quiet. The economic recovery would be long and arduous, a painful parallel to the emotional healing. The revelations about D.A.R.K. King, his identity as a grieving artist driven to madness by the Port Royal Project's betrayal, resonated deeply. The scandal, once a footnote in the island's recent history, was dragged back into the harsh light. The remaining Port Royal Consortium members, Simone Dubois, Roger Finch, and the relatively unknown David Perch, were alive, but their lives were irrevocably shattered. While not facing criminal charges related to the D.A.R.K's actions, the public outcry and renewed scrutiny into their roles in the failed project mounted. Lawsuits were filed by those who had lost pensions and livelihoods, a desperate, belated attempt to seek justice. The D.A.R.K., in his twisted way, had forced Bermuda to confront its own moral decay, even at the cost of unimaginable suffering. For Commissioner Vance, the end of the D.A.R.K's reign was a reprieve, but not a triumph. He had presided over the darkest chapter in Bermuda's history. Though the killer was caught, the profound public trust in the police force had been fractured. He announced his early retirement shortly after, a man broken by the weight of responsibility and the sheer inhumanity of the crimes. Special Agent Mark Jensen and Detective Inspector Anya Sharma departed a week after D.A.R.K. King's death. Jensen offered Sinclair a firm handshake, a grudging respect in his eyes. "You too," he said, nodding to Sinclair and Bree. "You understood him better than anyone." The symbolism, it was key. We'll be in touch for the post-mortem analysis. This case will be studied for decades. Sharma, ever perceptive, offered Bree a small, knowing smile. "You saw the narrative, Detective Patterson. That's a rare skill. Don't lose it. It's what will be needed when the next darkness comes to paradise." Liam O'Connell, the young constable, had witnessed horrors no officer should. He'd shown immense courage, but the trauma was visible in his quiet demeanor. He would continue his service, but his innocence, like Bermuda's, was forever gone. Sinclair Howard and Bree Patterson stood on the silent, empty steps of the Cabinet Office a month later, the sea air cool on their faces. The concrete column and the long-tail boat had been removed, the steps scrubbed clean, but the invisible stain of terror remained. They hadn't taken a holiday, couldn't it? The aftermath was a different kind of relentless. Debriefings, paperwork, attempts to help the island heal. Their bond, forged in the crucible of absolute horror, was unbreakable. They moved with a shared weariness, their conversations often unspoken, a glance enough to convey a decade of shared trauma. "He was an artist," Bree murmured, looking out at the glittering Hamilton harbor. "A madman, but he was an artist." And he forced us to see things we didn't want to see about this island, about ourselves. Sinclair nodded. He held up a mirror, Bree, a shattered, bloody mirror, and we couldn't look away. He thought of Damien King, the man driven by grief and a warped sense of justice. He was a monster, yes, but a monster born of a very real, very painful wound. What about the little boat? Bree asked, turning to him. The one he threw on the grass? Sinclair reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, intricately carved cedar longtail boat. It was the one Damien had crafted, perfect and unsullied, untouched by the grotesque display. They almost missed it. I kept it. As a reminder, Bree took it, running her thumb over the smooth, unblemished wood. A reminder of what Bermuda could be, or what it should have been. Before all of this, she looked at him, a silent promise passing between them. Are you staying, Sinclair? Are we staying? He looked out at the tranquil turquoise waters, deceptively calm under the Bermudian sun. The island was wounded, but it was resilient. Its people were strong, their history deep. They would rebuild. They would heal. We found him, Bree, Sinclair said, his voice quiet but firm. We stopped him. We owe it to Bermuda to help pick up the pieces. We owe it to the ones who didn't make it. The work isn't done just because the killer is dead. He looked at her, a silent promise passing between them. We're staying. We have to. Bree squeezed his hand, the small cedar boat warm in her palm. The D.A.R.K had gone, but his message lingered, a spectral serpent coiled around the heart of paradise. And the fragile beauty of Bermuda, now irrevocably scarred, would forever bear the mark of the truth he had so violently unveiled. The scars would fade, but the lessons, etched in blood and fear, would forever define its future.